My love for you is like a truck berserker.
Hello, everybody. My name is John Horry, independent developer of a tabletop game called Pathways to Adventure. I am here today to do a little presentation for Peter over at Tales from Elsewhere. It took me a second there. He has asked several members of the community to present their barbarian-like class and how would your system, kind of encapsulate what a barbarian really is. And so I'm here today to show you my Berserker, which is my version of a barbarian class. Alright, so here we have the Berserker, and it is a damage dealing powerhouse. It is very much about getting in there, doing a bunch of damage, running out of steam early if you're not careful and overexerting yourself, um, and being a bit reckless. Most barbarians kind of fit that playstyle, and I really try to drive that home with the design of the Berserker. Um, a lot of the stuff at level 1 in my system, it looks like there's a huge amount of features, but it kind of boils down usually to one active feature, and everything else is passive and tells you how certain things operate with your class. And so we'll start off ignoring the Wild Fury lessons, because that just tells you what abilities you start with, which you can see down below eventually. We'll get to those later. Heavy metal is really fun. So you get bonus defense while you're wielding a two-handed weapon that weighs at least 3, and you get the benefits of wearing a shield. So that extra defense comes in as shield bonus. And if you were to use, like, for example, the bash attack, which is based on your shield, it would gain that plus 3 defense as part of that maneuver. Heavy weapon training. You are very accurate with your heavy weapons and gain half your body as additional accuracy for weapons that weigh at least 3. And so this really does hammer home that ability of you want to be wielding those big, meaty, two-handed axes or great swords. Whatever your preference is. Most of Berserker stuff is kind of imagined using a big two-handed axe or multiple smaller hand axes. And so, Heavy Toss. This one's really fun. It's very Berserker. Your two-handed martial weapons gain the Throne property and deal 3 times your body stat as additional damage for the headshot maneuver. And so headshot's a very inaccurate attack. We'll get to that later. But it basically, doing some live editing as we go, it essentially says that you're going to be throwing away your big two-handed axe, trying to get that hard-to-hit attack, but if you do hit that attack, it's going to deal a lot of bonus damage. And so it gives you a reason to potentially have even 2 really big axes on your back, one for throwing and one for fighting. Thrown Axe Expert. You are very accurate with your Thrown Axe weapons, gaining half your body stat as accuracy on any Thrown Axe weapons, which includes your big two-hander. And then Unarmored Defense. This is similar to what you'll find in a lot of games that deal with barbarians to make it where they still function well without armor. And so they get to have twice their body stat plus 2 while wearing no armor, but it cannot exceed the game's armor cap of 10. That's a hard cap for players that very rarely can get breached. Not a Coward. You cannot wield shields and cannot gain the dodge proficiency through any means. What this means is you simply cannot dodge and you cannot wear shields. So that keeps your defense on the lower end of things. But you're a Berserker, you don't care. You're there to do the damage and just shrug off the blows as they come, which will make sense once we get to level 2. And then here is the more active component of the class at level 1, something to actually manage and think about. Inner Rage. You gain rage charges equal to your physique amount and regain 1 charge per 6 rounds. So basically, each round in combat of Pathways to Adventure is 10 seconds. And so after a minute's time, you'll regain 1 of your charges. So in between fights, people tend to recharge their rage charges fairly quickly. So it's one of those resources that if you don't spend it, you'll probably wish you had. Maybe you don't want to run out of it completely in a combat just in case you have back-to-back fights. But, in most situations, those are a little rare for games in general. So what are they used for? They're used for a lot of things in the class. Your rage charges. They start off being used for raging strikes. It allows you for once per round to spend one of your rage charges to attack again as part of your execute maneuver action. And so that gives you another free attack to get in already at level 1. And so in Pathways to Adventure, every person who uses the execute maneuver action can make up to 2 maneuver attacks in one round. So basically, everybody starts the game with extra attack if you're familiar with more of like a 5e system, for example, or Pathfinder, where they have multiple attacks you can make in a turn. But Berserker gets to spend a rage charge to go above and beyond and get a third attack already at level 1. And so they also, at level 2, is where things start to kind of really pick up for the class. They get Reckless Abandon. They expend a rage charge to enter a Berserk state, which the Berserk state is a keyword. Berserk is currently only used for Berserker, but it might be used later on for other situations. But incoming and outgoing attacks are advantaged, which is similar to other games that use advantage and disadvantage. You roll twice and you take the better of the two outcomes. But it's definitely a double-edged sword because any attacks coming in at the Berserker also are advantaged. So being raged is definitely a risky thing at times, but to mitigate that risk, they do have pain suppression. So there is not a base part of the Berserk state, it's something that they get for being a Berserker, which it has damage resistance to all damage types. This is the main thing that allows them to tank a lot of incoming damage, and it is quite powerful in general. It's definitely a big power boost once they get to level 2. Supreme Rage, and this is really interesting. This is where they get a lot of additional damage that other classes may not get early on. Supreme Rage, your attacks gain additional damage equal to your body aspect while in the Berserk state. So for most barbarians at level 2, that's going to be, at all barbarians at level 2, that's going to be plus 3 damage because you start with 3 in your body stat. Eventually that can raise up to 5 if the barbarian, which most likely they will, invests in their body stat later on. Their body aspect, excuse me. And then lastly, Tactical Rager. Berserk State also causes enemies' prevention rolls to be disadvantaged from your tactical abilities. So tactical abilities in Pathways to Adventure are things that produce some harmful outcome for your opponent that doesn't result in damage. So it's not an attack, but it's like a kick to trip somebody over or knock them prone, or a headbutt to knock them unconscious, or dazed, actually, excuse me, with a headbutt. So things that put you at an advantageous state by putting your enemy at a disadvantaged state. And with this, they have to roll twice and take the worst outcome to try to prevent your tactical abilities. For example, if I go to kick you, it's using my tactical ability to kick you. And you are trying to prevent that by using your avoid. And if your avoidance meets or succeeds my tactical ability, my potency is what it's called, then you are not kicked over. In this case, you would have to roll twice, though, and take the worst of the two outcomes. And as a D6 system, a 1 is always a critical failure, an epic fail as we like to call it, and a 6 would be a epic success, a critical success. And so being disadvantaged is really very much a bad situation to find yourself in. So Berserkers are actually very good at controlling enemies, on top of dealing a lot of damage. Control is like their secondary big thing they bring to a party, is being able to really disrupt enemies. And that plays a huge component in that. Lastly, they have Infuriating Snarl. They expend 2 stamina to issue a challenge to a creature within 6 range. So challenged creatures must attack and move towards and face the challenger. and until that they do an attack against them that successfully hits them. And so challenge can be very powerful to help your allies out, to either give them the backside of the enemy so they get advantages because the enemy cannot see them, so they get a +5 to hit because they are unseen. It also can just simply protect enemies from slower, big hitting enemies. And it doesn't take any action economy to use that, it just takes some of their stamina. So, although they are not designed to be the tank class necessarily, like some other classes are, because again they are quite easy to hit as a berserker, they can still protect their party members if they need to. So that is all you get at level 2, quite a bit in one little package. At the end of the day, it's, you know, you rage and you can snarl at people. It's two active things. The rest kind of build on that passive aspect of what it means to rage as a berserker. And then level 3 is where they get a huge power spike. If you're familiar with other systems, this would be like level 5 in 5th edition, for example, where people really get a big power spike to go from one tier of play to another. That's what happens at 3rd level for the berserker. They get Flurry of Arms, is the overall feature name. And Brutal Flurry, when they expend a rage charge to attack, they instead get to attack twice instead of once as that bonus attack. And this also increases to 3 attacks at 6th level and 4 attacks at 9th level. So this is like your extra attack feature for Berserker. It lets them really just explode with a lot of damage right at the start of a fight. They do have to be careful though, because even though they are using additional attacks, sorry, that's my cat. Even though they are using additional attacks, they still have to pay the stamina cost for each of those attacks. Stamina is a resource in Pathways to Adventure that recovers fairly quickly. You get half your stamina back rounded down per turn, per round, excuse me. But you can still run out of it. And if you run out of it, you become exhausted, which is a very bad situation to find yourself in. So as that is said, it's usually very advantageous for berserkers to build up a little bit into their endurance stat to give themselves more stamina to keep going. Or maybe you don't care. Maybe you just want to be the berserker that just goes all in for damage and accuracy, and you just want to kill the creature with that very first set of flurries. Maybe that's your speed, and then you just have a turn where you cool down and don't do anything on round 2 and just recover your stamina. That's definitely a playstyle a berserker could go for if they want to go all in, on that alpha strike, as they say. And then beyond that, they get Chain of Carnage, which is really fun. When executing additional attacks, each 3rd, 4th, or 5th successive hit is a critical hit. So berserkers, they are fairly accurate, essentially, because of their advantage on all their attacks. And so their ability to string successful hits together is actually fairly good. And as long as they're successfully hitting on that 3rd, 4th, or 5th hit, they get a free critical hit, which is exceptionally powerful. It's one of the reasons why berserkers are the tip top of the damage potential in Pathways to Adventure. They are either the top or tied with the top classes for damage dealing if they're supported well by their party. And we'll get more into that later when we look at what attacks they get. So level 4, Retribution. This is really interesting. So as a reaction, which you get 1 reaction per round in Pathways to Adventure, that is triggered when a hostile creature within 1 range makes an attack, you get to execute an attack maneuver. So basically, if someone attacks you or anybody else and they make an attack and they're within range of you, you get to use your reaction just to flat out attack them right then and there. And so that can be another good way to hit people when it's not your round, when it's the enemy's round. So very simple but effective ability at level 4. And now we get into some of the really interesting stuff. Wholesale Slaughter with Double Edge. While you're raging, you can spend 2 of your rage charges to cause all incoming and outgoing attacks to be critical hits for 1 round. So this is where you really just want to blow something up and hopefully it doesn't kill you the next round, because you are going to be exceptionally vulnerable. Level 5 is another power spike level for a lot of classes, and it's certainly true for Berserker. So when we go into level 6, we have Brutal Strike. While in Berserk state, the first Overwhelm attack each round is Empowered. And Empowered is a keyword for double damage. We had to make it a keyword because too many things stacked with doubling and doubling and doubling. So we had to start using the word Empowered to make sure we didn't have too many things that stacked on top of each other that doubled. So you can only get one source of Empowered on an attack. But yes, so basically this reads as double damage for the first Overwhelm ability, and that ability will either knock a foe prone or push them up to 3 range. And there's also Concussion. So this Brutal Strike feature we're talking about, right above it, it inflicts the unconscious for 6 rounds on a critical hit, which is exceptionally powerful. It allows you to knock someone unconscious to finish a fight without necessarily killing them. And it allows you to follow up with free critical hits on the unconscious creature if your allies go to hit after you. So that can be a really good way to set up your party, for example, to set them up for success as a Berserker. And again, that plays into their control aspect of their class, their kind of secondary role. And then we had the Beast Within with Unchained. So while you are in the Berserk state, you gain immunity to the Snared, Immobilized, and Frightened afflictions, and the Grab state. So you're unable to be grabbed by enemies. You can't be made to run away in fear. You cannot be made immobilized. And Snared is reducing your movement speed by half, and it prevents specialized movement like flight or swimming or burrowing or climbing. So Snared can be pretty deleterious to have on you as well. And so you just get to have immunity to all that. You're unchained, unburdened, unbreakable. Very good feature because those things do show up a lot on creatures that are beyond level 7. Especially if you think of like dragons or other creatures that might have an AoE frighten ability like a roar. Very good to be able to just say, "Nah, fam, I'm not getting roared away from this. I'm coming for you, Mr. Dragon." And then at level 8, we have Pure Power. While in the Berserk state, all of your attacks ignore damage resistance. And so that is huge. You start running into creatures that have resistance to damage later in levels. And so being able to ignore that as a Berserker is again another source of just absolute power. You are just pushing through their defenses and really just hammering home that offensive potential they have. Which ironically, now that I think about it, makes a Berserker on Berserker fight a little interesting because it would ignore their damage resistance for each other. So I never thought about that, but that would be a good counter to an enemy Berserker as another Berserker. And Breaking Force. Your attacks can destroy magical force constructs, such as those created by the Force Construct spell. So if you think about games like 5th edition, there are things like Wall of Force, which is, an undestroyable or indestructible, magical wall of force that normally would cage in a person like a Berserker or a Barbarian. And in this case, you are just absolutely so strong by this level, at 8th level, that you can just crack right through those. So it comes up rarely, but when it does, you'll be glad that you can do it. And then Unquenching Bloodlust. We start with Executioner. So while in the Berserk state, attacks are now lethal and empowered against bloodied foes. So bloodied foes are foes that are below 50% health. If their HP is lower than 50%, they are considered bloodied, even if they're not a foe that traditionally has blood. It's just a terminology. And lethal is very interesting. So in Pathways to Adventure, both players and enemies, if you fall to 0 health points, you are not dead. You are at what is called Death's Door. And so at Death's Door, you roll at the end of your round to see if you die or live. And it's you roll a d6, a 1 is a death, a 6 means you pop back up at 1 health point at the end of the round. And every time you succeed on this roll, but you're still at death's door, the difficulty of surviving goes down, or the difficulty of rolling a survival roll increases. Sorry, the difficulty increases. The likelihood of survival goes down, is what I should say. So for the second roll, you would die on a 1 and a 2. If you have to roll a third time, it'll be a 1, 2, or 3, etc. And so it is quite useful for a berserker in this case to be able to just outright kill something with lethal. It prevents having to finish a foe off from the death's door state, and they can't be revived, generally speaking, because in this case the idea is like you're chopping their head off, or you're doing something where it makes it really hard for them to be revived by allied or enemy healers. And so Executioner is very, very good, very powerful for a 9th level feature, which is when the power spikes really increase for the game, is the last 2 levels. Kill Streak is really good. So as a reaction triggered when a creature dies from your attack, gain an additional run, and so all your movement speed returns, and an additional attack this round. So it just, again, gets to go from one creature to the other, and you get to start attacking again after you kill one creature. And so just continuing on that, carnage, that blood trail of just messing people up and then going on for the next one. And lastly, we have I'm the Juggernaut, Unbridled Rage. So you get to expend all of your rage charges to enter an overwhelmingly powerful berserk state for 6 rounds, in which you gain immunity to physical damage, empowered, double damage, +4 movement, that should say run, and 3 rage charges per round. And your size increases by 1 category. So if you were a medium creature, you become large and take up 2x2 squares. If you were a large creature, you become huge and take up 3x3 squares. But that does come at a cost, and we had a really funny situation with one of our Berserker players that was playing at level 10 as a playtest, which is overexertion. So after this Berserk state ends, you become unconscious for 1 hour. Well, during that 1 hour, they almost had their brain eaten by an ally who had unfortunately been revived from the dead without a brain, which caused them to become a zombie. And zombies love to eat brains. And if there's an unconscious target, the zombie can eat their brain in 1 round. So it got very spicy and dicey for our Berserker who had overexerted themselves and put themselves at a very precarious circumstance. So, moving right down past the chart, this is just the stats that you would have to fill in on your character sheet. It looks like a lot, but it really isn't that bad once everything is all tacked up and considered. But moving right along, we have martial attack maneuvers. So these are one of the 3 types of abilities in the game, which are called maneuvers. They use your stamina, and they're very physically focused, usually around a martial or a projectile weapon. Some weapons can count as both, such as axes, because you can throw them and you can hack with them. And so, let's talk about what each of the different weapons does, and then go into the abilities themselves. So while you have a great axe, you get to add your body as maneuver weapon damage to the flurry ability, which we'll talk why flurry is so powerful for berserkers in just a moment. Hand axe, you get to add your body as accuracy for flurry, which in some cases will allow your flurry to hit things that it normally would not. So let's look at flurry, because it's such a core ability for the berserker. Flurry, you get to make 3 attacks, and they get to add your physique stat plus 3 damage to each attack. But since these are each individual attacks, anything that adds flat damage to the attack can be very powerful. For example, if your body stat's 5, and let's say you max out your physique and you're going for full damage, that would be 10 physique, 3 from the base for 13, and 5 more to be 18 per hit for 3 separate hits. So this is why I say axes in general are very commonly used as the berserker's main weapon. And, oops, sorry, Grammarly, go away. And so, flurry is just exceptionally powerful. But all the other attacks have certain uses as well. You have Helm Splitter, which can only be used with a two-handed weapon. Does very good damage, 2 times physique plus 9. It has plus 5 accuracy. And so let's talk about how attacks work in this game, because it'll make sense with Flurry and Overwhelm and why that they have a plus 0. So you have your base accuracy, which is determined from your class's aspects and their attributes. So if we have a body stat of 5, that's going to add 5 into our technique stat, which is one of the 3 attribute stats for the body. And technique determines how accurate you are with your weapon attacks. And so let's say we went full on accuracy, we add plus 10 technique. So that's going to be a base of 10. And then each of the abilities is going to add a certain amount of accuracy, and then you roll a d6. And that's how you determine your attack value. That has to be contested by the enemy's defense. And so, if we look at Overwhelm and Flurry, we notice that you have plus 0. So these are considered inaccurate attacks. They usually do something very powerful, like either a lot of damage, or in Overwhelm's case, they ignore that damage resistance, so it's good against other berserkers and enemies that have resistance to physical damage. But it comes at a cost. They're less accurate. So you're going to want your allies or yourself to set yourself up for success, to knock an opponent over, to attack them from behind, to wait for an ally to blind the target. There's all sorts of ways to lower an opponent's defense so that these less accurate attacks are more viable. That said, a roll of 6 on a dice always hits and critically hits. And so for Flurry, sometimes people just fish for crits. And they're like, well, one of these eventually has to roll a 6. I can't hit the guy otherwise. I might as well just risk it for a biscuit. And so you will see people that do that playstyle with Berserker quite frequently, which is fun. Everybody likes to gamble. Especially since they get so many attacks in and advantage on those attacks. Those flurries can be quite deadly. Moving right along, we have Leap Strike in Helm Splitter. We talked about Helm Splitter ignores armor, so it's really good against heavily armored foes. Leap Strike is to help you get into melee range. You get to execute a long jump from up to 3 range away and close the distance and do some moderately okay damage. Overwhelm, we already talked about that one, and it ignores damage resistance and does a lot of damage. Power Cleave is fun. Power Cleave attacks everything in front of you in adjacent 3 squares and does very good damage. So if you hit at least 2 targets, you're doing a lot of damage with that. Flurry, we've already talked about, is a wonderful ability for Berserkers. Bladestorm is very commonly used. It's less damage than Power Cleave, but it hits everything around you within 1 radius. Execute is exceptionally powerful. It doesn't look like it at first because you only see the physique plus 6, but what it does is all of the damage that this ability does gets doubled against a bloodied foe, and it's lethal. So great, especially before you get that free lethality buff later on. And then lastly, we have Precise Strike. This is what you use if you're against an enemy that's very defensive, trying to block, trying to dodge. Precise Strike's your lower damage but guaranteed more likely to hit option. And so that's what you'll start with as a Berserker for your melee stuff. For your range stuff, you have a few things, nothing too crazy. You have Barrage, which is like a ranged version of Flurry, where you are attacking 3 times quickly with 3 different thrown axes, which are your hand axes. And then Headshot, another inaccurate attack, but this is where you're really trying to land the headshot with that axe. It does fantastic damage, and for hand axes, it adds double their maneuver weapon damage for headshot. And like that one feature we saw earlier, Great Axe gets to add 3 times your body stat as maneuver weapon damage for headshot. So it can make these quite powerful. But again, they're very inaccurate. A Berserker's not necessarily supposed to be great at ranged combat, but again, if your allies are working with you and they've got a creature blinded, weakened, knocked over, all those fun defense lowering things, it can be quite good. Quite good, in fact, with those ranged attacks while you're trying to close the gap and get into melee range, for example. And then we have some tactical maneuvers. They start with headbutt and tackle. So tackle or headbutt, excuse me, it forces the dazed state on a creature and the user for 1 round. Only costs 1 stamina, so it's not that bad. But while you're dazed, you have -10 defense, and you can't cast spells and you can't recite chants, which is the third type of ability that we're not going to be talking too much about today with Berserker. And so that can be really funny, but it also, again, it has a negative for yourself as well, because you become dazed. So using that's a very tactical option that you got to think a lot about. And tackle is really powerful. You get to move from 3 range away and then force the pinned state on a creature and make them make a concentration roll. So if a creature is a spellcaster that's concentrating on a powerful spell, this could potentially interrupt that. And also, foes that are in the pinned state can't take any actions. You're pinned down to the ground, essentially. The only thing they can do is try to shake you off of them while you're pinned them. So again, it leans into that secondary role as being a controller with Berserker. And so they do have a few chants. Their chants, though, are instantaneous. Um, the attack chant they get is Admit Defeat. It's very accurate, and it does morale damage to the target. And we didn't have too much time earlier to talk about what morale does. Well, morale is the resource cost for chant abilities. And if you run out of morale, you become demoralized, and you give up. You capitulate. You run away in fear. Or you just try to stop fighting, and you're willing to, yeah, let's just talk this out a little bit. No need to rush. No, we don't need to fight to the death, just the pain, And so your character essentially, or the enemy characters, has to essentially capitulate and give up if they lose all their morale. So it's kind of a weird way to phrase it as an attack, but having a berserker tell you to sit down, shut up, and, know your place, pretty berserkery. And so then we have your tactical chants. And so anytime you make a chant with a great axe or a hand axe held as your focus for the weapon, it's kind of like you're casting through your weapon. But when you do those chants, you can still make a free attack as part of that reciting chant action. And so even if you are using Admit Defeat or Back Away Now or any of these other chants that based around intimidation, you get a free attack in, which is very potent, and it gives you a reason to still use these while wanting to still attack a creature. You're not wasting your whole turn just only chanting. And all of their chants recite instantly, which is very useful. Except for Admit Defeat. That does take 10 seconds in universe, a full round of you intimidating the person to tell them to admit defeat. So that one actually does take a full round of chanting. The others, however, do not. They recite instantaneously. And so you have Back Away Now. It inflicts the Frighten affliction and the Snared affliction for 3 rounds for up to 12 range away. And so that's very good if you're trying to crowd control somebody away from your party, or even just make them run away from you while you start chopping their tendons. However you want to do it. But it does cost a morale point, which again is a very risky resource to lose. And it does not come back quickly. They come back once every 10 minutes of resting to get a point of morale back. And so for that, it is definitely an interesting way to fight as a berserker. You just don't want to use it all up, or else your berserker gives up and is demoralized, and that's never a good look for a berserker. You have Cease and Desist. You instantly immobilize a target for 3 rounds. Again, another good control ability. Coward is good. This allows you to force a creature to be challenged from up to 12 range away. Now, they do have the ability to do this with stamina as well, so it's not as useful as some of the others, but even at level 1, it'll give you a way to challenge a creature. And it does work from quite far away, though. It does work from 12 range. And then On Your Knees. This is a fun one. So if you're against a creature, for example, that has really good avoidance, like they're a very physically fit creature, and kicking them over or something is going to be hard for your party to do, On your knees is another way to force a creature into the prone state. So again, you and your allies get that +5 chance to hit them. So on your knees is a pretty funny one, and we've had some people that have joked about it being a little dominant, shall we say, a little domination-y, which was not the intent, but hey, emergent gameplay. And then they do get one fun chant to buff, which is called Spirit of Wolf, and it doubles the movement speed of whoever you put it on for 10 minutes. And so that can be very effective for a berserker that wants to just rush in and start chopping stuff up to bits. And the very last thing we have is the reaction section. So reactions are things that you do in response to triggers, and again, you get one reaction per round. So they can counter bash, which allows them to use the bash attack against a creature if they successfully block. Endure pain is very commonly used by berserkers. It allows them to gain damage resistance to all damage for triggering attacks. For triggering attack and for 1 round is what it should say. I might need to go correct that verbiage. But yeah, Endure Pain is very good. It gives you the same benefit as the Rage does, but you don't have to rage while you're doing it. And so that's a good way if you really are trying to be more of a tank berserker who has to just endure some pain for a little bit before they go full offensive. That might be a good option to do. Punishing Strike is very commonly used. This is like, in most systems, they would call it an opportunity attack. It's essentially that, but baked in as a reaction feature. So not everybody in the game has it. You have to have athletics proficiency to actually have access to this reaction. Sorry about that. And so when a creature moves out of your range, you can use a martial attack maneuver that's athletics based against the triggering creature, which they have a lot of athletics attacks. And then intercepting strike is the opposite of that. You get to use a precision martial attack against a creature that enters your melee range. So 1 for when they leave and 1 for when they engage with you. And then clinging helps you climb up and hold on to a creature. Or if you've pinned a creature to the ground, cling can help you hold on to them and make their avoidance roll trying to shake you off becomes disadvantage for 1 round is what that should say. For 1 round. And so it makes it harder for them to successfully shake you off if you use cling. And all of these cost stamina, so again, you want to make sure you have enough stamina at the end of your round if you think you're going to need to use any of these reactions. And then lastly, we have Riposte, which is if you prevent an attack while in the blocking state with your weapon, you can use a precision attack to retaliate against the creature. And that is everything for the Berserker. And so, with that said, my phone screen has died. Oh no, I have run out of battery on my phone. So you won't be able to see my ugly mug, but thank you again so much for listening to me prattle on about my beloved Berserker. It is certainly one of my earlier classes I designed, but it's always one of my favorites in my heart. Hopefully everything kind of makes sense with the way I've described it. And the biggest takeaway is they are reckless, they are durable, and they deal tons of damage and can really control people. They're very tactical in how and when they want to make themselves vulnerable, and to what level they want to make themselves vulnerable. Do you go all in for the double-edged critical hit for me and you? Do you berserk right at the very start of the fight, or do you give yourself a little time to let enemies get weakened down first before you go all in? Do you go all in, or do you kind of pace yourself a little bit with your attacks each round? All of these are options, and it's really cool to see emergent gameplay of how people actually play the Berserker, and I can't wait to showcase more of my classes in the future. So, thank you so much for watching, and have yourself a wonderful rest of your week.